Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Looking forward to the next session.
Mhm.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome those watching in the Zoom and online in all of our platforms. We are happy to welcome back for the second week with us Rabbi Jack Romberg. He is the retired rabbi of Temple Israel in Tallahassee, Florida. And he entered the rabbinate as a second career after graduating from the University in Pittsburgh in 1976 with a BA in history focusing on Germany, and then helping the family's furniture manufacturing business. In 1995, he entered Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, which your rabbis are also alumni of, and was ordained in 2001. And before retiring, Rabbi Romberg decided to write a book on his great uncle Richard Stern, perhaps forming a third career. And this month is devoted to that book and the series of events that are surrounding his uncle's life. So Rabbi Romberg, I'm going to hand things over to you. Welcome back for a second week with us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Jessica. I appreciate it. So just to back up a little bit to say a couple of things that I ended last week. So through the 19th century, of course, the Jewish people in Germany, the German Jews, they had the kind of life where sometimes it raised up very, very well, and sometimes it dropped down very badly. And there were some incidents of some very, very bad anti-Semitism through the 19th century. But one of the things that I mentioned towards the end of last week, which is very important to realize about the German Jews as they entered the 20th century, is they had done very, very well because of their emancipation. They had done very, very well at raising themselves out of being poor and being able to actually 95% of them were either mid-class or wealthy. And a lot of the middle class German Jews were actually even high mid-class. And I'm starting by showing this picture again of the mansion built by Marcus Stern, who was Richard Stern's dad. And this was built towards the end of the 1890s. And you can see it's called Villa Stern. And it was the largest house ever built in the area around Freisheim and Weilerswist, those towns in which there was the Jewish community that was being built up as an example of how Jewish communities could be built in places that they had not been allowed before their emancipation. So again, at the turn of the century, there was about in Prussia, in the state of Prussia in Germany, there were 200 of the wealthiest Prussian families and 40 of those 200 wealthiest families were Jewish. In Berlin, the Jews were 5% of the whole population, but the Jewish population of Berlin, because of this level of their wealth, they provided more than 30% of the city's taxes. This kind of situation was common in German cities as the 20th century began. Now, again, I'm showing you this picture of the mansion that was built by Marcus Stern, and this is the house in 1899 that Richard Stern was born in. And I have to show you this. This is a picture of the same house that I took when I was doing the research in Weilerswist in September of 2019. And if you look at it, you see it looks so much like the original one that was built. It's now owned by the town of Weilerswist, and it is used to teach children and teenagers how to dance, how to sing, and how to act. So it's interesting how they've taken over this house and use it for a number of different things. Okay, so in the turn of this, the turn of the century, there were a number of grand synagogues that were being built, and so here is a key synagogue. This is the Runestrasse Synagogue of Cologne, Germany. It was completed in 1899, and it became the largest synagogue in Cologne, Germany. And while it was destroyed, of course, during Kristallnacht in 1938, like so many synagogues were, and we'll get to that actually in the next session, the third session, we'll get into Kristallnacht. But this was rebuilt. This photo, of course, is from 1938, but Runestrasse Synagogue was rebuilt after the war, and I toured it when I was also in Germany a few years ago. And it's a beautiful, beautiful synagogue, and it's the largest synagogue in Cologne and the key synagogue of the Jewish community that is rebuilding itself in Cologne, Germany. Okay. German Jews were not, here's an important thing. German Jews who, as we enter the 20th century, they were not big supporters of Theodor Herzl's building of Zionism. Now, you know that Theodor Herzl was from Austria-Hungary, okay? And you probably know from other things that he established the Zionist movement and put together the first Zionist Congress in 1897. And of the 207 delegates in 1897, only 16 of them were from Germany. And Germany had a big group of German Jews. There were 600,000 German Jews living in Germany at that time. So most of the people, most of the delegates attending the Zionist Congress in 1897 were from Russia or Poland, Jews from them. In 1899, only around 400 of 500,000 of the 600,000 German Jews even registered. Only 400 of 600,000 German Jews registered as Zionists. In 1904, that rose to 6,000. And after 1909, the younger generation was more committed to Zionism with a much stronger heart feeling about the possibility of there being an Israel, about there being a Jewish home in the traditional place. And in the early 1930s, it had gotten, the whole idea of Zionism had gotten big. And in fact, my dad in the mid 1930s, 33, 34, 35, as he was becoming a teenager in those years, he actually became a member of Hashomer Hatzair, which was one of the organizations that trained Jews on how to be in a kibbutz and how to work in a kibbutz and so forth. And so Dad actually and his family in the early to mid 1930s, they were thinking that if anything, if they were going to leave Germany, that they would go to Palestine and be in the Jewish home there. But in early of the 20th century, that was not the feeling by the vast majority of German Jews. So in 1912, which of course was an election year, the results showed that most of the German voters were against racial politics. The anti-Semitic parties had faded way down, and in fact, the party that was called anti-Semitic, that actually their actual name was anti-Semitism, was that party was gone, and those groups were not winning many votes at all. So the conservative parties who did campaign against Jewish money, Jewish lovers, Jewish newspapers, they had a large setback. They felt back. However, the Social Democratic Party, who campaigned strongly against anti-Semitism, won 35% of the popular vote, becoming the largest party in the Reichstag. The Reichstag, of course, is the parliament. Okay, and 35% is a huge amount because it's not just two parties, political parties, it's a whole series of political parties. So winning 35% is huge in Germany at that point. So this is all leading up to World War I. Okay, and the Jewish community was doing pretty well. They wished things would be a little bit better, and a lot of Jews actually would have liked to have had the monarchy not be in Germany. They would have liked to have a democratic republic. They really would have liked to have a republic, as did most of this Social Democratic Party, that is including, of course, piles of non-Jews who were more liberal. Okay. But of course, in the summer of 1914, officially on July 28th of 1914, was the beginning of World War I. And the feeling among most Germans, including the Jewish Germans, the German Jews, was that Germany had the better military and the war would just be short, okay? Much like the 1870 war that was between Prussia and France. So most of the Germans felt that this would not be a long war. It would be the Germans winning pretty quickly. And one of the key reasons that the Jews supported this war was that it would be against Russia. And of course, Russia and the Tsar in Russia had usually been extremely anti-Semitic and very oppressive to Russian Jews. And so the German Jews were very much in favor of fighting Russia. Russia was actually the most openly anti-Semitic of all of the European countries at that particular time. Now, on August 4th of 1914, just several days after the beginning of World War I, the Kaiser, that is the Emperor of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm, he said that all people should be treated equally despite religious, political, or ethnic background differences. On the same day, that is on August 4th of 1914, as German Jews heard what Kaiser Wilhelm was declaring for the whole country, a large number of German Jews, despite their being liberal, they volunteered for the German army. And here is one of the volunteers. This is Heinrich Stern. That is my uncle Richard Stern's older brother. He's 8 to 9 years older than Richard Stern, and he volunteered for the German army on that famous day, that's famous day in Germany, August 4th of 1914. And he actually served in the German army for the entire war, from the moment he got his training at the end of the summer of 1914 through the end of the war, which of course was November 11th of 1918. He served almost all the time on the front line through the whole war. Now, by mid-1916, it was becoming very clear that Germany was actually losing the war. They didn't win quickly. They weren't even winning. They were actually losing, and they were losing even before America entered World War I. There became a divide in German politics over what to do. Jewish liberals, along with a lot of non-military focused people, they supported pushing for a peace agreement. And there were a lot of liberal Germans, not even Jews, but just liberal Germans, that felt that there had to be a peace agreement. There had to be a negotiation and a treaty made already in 1916. But of course, the militarists didn't want to stop the war. They wanted to keep the war going so that Germany could at least conquer, some places and annex those places. Despite the large amount of Jews as soldiers, anti-Semitism rose as the war went badly. In October of 1916, the war minister did a Jewish census in the army to try and prove that they were disloyal by not really serving on the front line. And by the way, here's an example of what was coming out in 1916 that was anti-Semitic. Okay, a caricature of a Jew serving in the German army. Well, the German war minister, like I said, he did a census in the army to try and show that the Jews were disloyal and that they really weren't serving on the front line so much. Well, that accusation was proven to be completely false. Over 7,000 Jews had already been decorated, and that's again by October of 1916. And 3,000 Jews had been killed, and 80% of the Jews were serving on the front lines. And that's what the census showed. Well, Richard Stern, my great uncle, Uncle Richard, was drafted into the army in June of 1917. He spent a short time on the Eastern Front of Russia, fighting against Russia. Okay. He spent, by November of 1917, of course, the Bolshevik Revolution placed the communists in power, and it was clear that they wanted to remove Russia from the war. Around the same time, Uncle Richard was transferred to the 2nd Machine Gun Company of the Landwehr Infantry, Regiment 31. That regiment was transferred to the Western Front in February of 1917. And here is a picture of Richard Stern, Uncle Richard, just in the fall of 1917, serving in the German army. Okay. Now, here is Richard's service booklet that was put out by the German army. And of course, he had to fill out part of it with all kinds of information. This particular page shows every battle that he participated in, starting, of course, in 1917. And his first really bad battle was on December 1st of 1917. And he, of course, was in piles of battles from that point on. Richard Stern was praised by the lieutenant commanding his company as a very, very good machine gunner. Starting in the beginning of 1918, he was in consistent series of tough battles. On February 21st of 1918, he fought in a tough battle in Flanders, Belgium, as a machine gunner. Generally, he was near Flanders through the whole spring. In the summer, he was moved to the front line near Alsace-Lorraine, participating in the German offensive near Champagne from July 15th to July 17th as a machine gunner. Clearly, he did something bravely during the July offensive because on August 22nd of 1918, he was awarded the Iron Cross. A special picture of him was taken on August 15th of 1918, just before he received the medal. Now, the war ended on November 11th, of course, of 1918. As I said, Allies told Germany that their soldiers had to leave the front lines in France and Belgium in 3 days. On January 16th of 1919, Richard Stern received 50 marks, along with all soldiers plus 6 to pay for a way to get home. And he got coupons to get food, which would expire by February 9th of 1919. He got home close to his 20th birthday. And the Jewish Jewish information connected to World War I that needs to be known is that about 100,000 Jews served in the German army during World War I. 30,000 won some level of decoration. That's 30% of the Jews who participated in the war actually were decorated at some level, okay? And 12,000 of the Jews were actually killed, and that they lost their life. Okay, well, Heinrich Stern, of course, is Uncle Richard's older brother. He represented the excited feeling of German Jews at the beginning of World War I by his volunteering for the war on August 4th of 14. Richard Stern was drafted, of course, when there was little enthusiasm left for the war. But even so, he did what he felt was necessary to show his patriotism to Germany. And that's how so many German Jews acted in World War I. They acted in a way to show their patriotism, even though they knew that this war was coming to an end. And there were all kinds of protests against the war in the last months of the war in Germany. There were protests all over Germany, including in Cologne, which is where the Stern family had moved to in 1908. And one example was a strike at a motor construction plant calling for peace and the end of the monarchy. So the protesters were not only against the end of only against the war and for the end of the war, but the protesters were also against ending the monarchy in Germany. Well, General Erich Ludendorff, a powerful leader of the German army, he knew that defeat was inevitable, and he told the government to sue for peace. And he was a nationalistic military conservative. His co-hero to German conservatives was the Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg, who would become a number of years later the president of Weimar Republic. And he was the president of the Weimar Republic when it collapsed to the Nazi army in 1933. So as the war came to an end, Friedrich Ebert of the Social Democratic Party was appointed to be the interim chancellor. And that was, of course, at the end of 1918. He oversaw the end of the war as well as the evolvement of the government from monarchy to the republic. Now, the Weimar Republic was established in 1919. It was officially established in 1919, hugely supported by German Jews. The rightists in Germany at that point identified the Weimar Republic with the Jews. They hated them, and they decried Jewish capitalism as being something awful. Okay. With the forming of the Weimar Republic, Jews ended up having true equality in practice as opposed to just in theory. And the patriotism of German liberalism, including the vast majority of Jews, about 85% of the Jews, was love of the country, but not afraid to address its failings. That kind of reminds us sometimes of how we look at America, is that we can love the country, but also admit that there are some failings in our country that have to be addressed. Well, that was the feeling of the Germans in the beginning of the 1920s as the Weimar Republic was put together and had such a strong support. But there was a large number of neoconservatives in the Weimar Republic beginning that came together as World War I ended. And they were, of course, very much in favor of a monarchy. They didn't really want a republic. They still wanted to have a king, an emperor. They also believed, the neoconservatives in Germany at that point, their beliefs included anti-intellectualism, acceptance of violence, political indifference. In other words, for example, not caring about elections for people, and the honor of taking second place to obedience. So they were against a number of things, and an example. Oh, sorry, that's Uncle Richard's. That's the certificate that he got for winning the the Iron Cross. Okay, here's an example of what I want to talk about. Now, this man is Walter Rathanau. Has anybody ever heard of Walter Rathanau? Yeah, okay. You know that he's Jewish, right? Okay, and he was very wealthy, and a very wealthy Jew who was smart and politically engaged. He warned that the war would not be short, but that he could not convince others to agree with him at that. Rathanau, about the upcoming economic problems this is during the beginning of the war, you know, he was about the economic problems that was coming up. He would talk about them and talk about how his talking about the problems that would be in the war, the economic problems that would be in the war, that would piss off a number of leading Germans. But the war minister, however, respected him and his knowledge, and he ended up appointing him on August 12th of 1914 to a position to reorganize the national economy. His work kept Germany from losing quickly from worse economic issues that France or the United Kingdom had had. Okay, after the war, in February of 1922, Rathanau agreed to become the national foreign minister. That was the highest position that any Jew had ever had in Germany. He worked hard to reconcile Germany with its former enemies, but his policy made the national right very, very angry. He ended up on June 24th of 1922, he ended up getting assassinated by a group of right-wing nationalists. So the German Jew who had the highest position ever was killed by a bunch of anti-Semitisms. The Jewish population in there's things to talk about what was going on in the Jewish population. The Jewish population in Nuremberg, Germany, grew from 1873 to 1920 by 10,000. They lived in a nice peace until they were very peaceful, the German Jews, and they were treated very peacefully until 1923, just a little after Rathanau was killed. The myth of Jewish murders during Easter, that was revived by a group of anti-Semites. The Jewish community had to set up watch for attacks even before the Nazis rised. So in 1923, the Nazi Party was tiny, and I'll get to the building of the Nazi Party in just a minute. Nationalism in the early 1920s was dominated by monarchists who did not want a democratic republic, and they tried to overthrow the Weimar Republic in March of 1920. They failed. In the election of May of 1924, the ultra-right, the anti-Semitic parties, began to take part in elections instead of just doing violent protesting. So in 1924, the Nazi Party started to participate in politics. It was very, very small at that point. Well, of course, we all know who Hitler is, who Hitler was, and he joined the German Workers' Party in 1919, and it was an ultra-left nationalist party. It became the Nazi Party in July of 1921, and it had 550 members. It grew fast. Beginning in 1922, it had 6,000 members. By September of 1923, it had 55,000 members. So you can see how quickly the Nazi Party was starting to grow, even early in the 1920s, as the Weimar Republic was, established and doing well with a lot of people. There was still a lot of support for a party such as the Nazi Party. Hitler and the Nazis, of course, as a lot of you probably know, they tried to take control of the Bavarian government in 1923. They failed, and Hitler was put in jail for a little bit during 1924. By 1928, the Nazi Party had over 100,000 members. And now now I'll tell us, hold on about the story that I want to tell about contender. This is a picture of Richard Stern in the middle of the 1920s. And this is an example of how so many German Jews through the 1920s were actually enjoying their life. And what he's doing here is he's with two women that he was dating in the middle to late 1920s, and they were playing at the Carnival, which was a very fun thing that happens every year in Cologne, Germany. So that's Uncle Richard. Now, one of the things he did in 1926 is his sister Martha, who is my dad's mother, my grandmother, she divorced her husband when my dad was 2.5 years old, and Uncle Richard became the legal guardian of my dad, and he took his sister and her son into his home that he had, and his sister got a job at one of the Katz butcher stores. Now, the Katz family that I'm about to talk about and give a story about, the Katz family were cousin families of the Stern family. And the two families were very, very close with each other, very close in friendship. Okay. Now, the Katz family in Cologne, Germany in the 1920s was one of the wealthiest families in Cologne. They had six stores in Cologne, including in a number of the stores were restaurants. Okay. So in 1928, there's actually something that I'm going to tell you about. I'm going to read a little bit from the book that I wrote. Okay. So the Katz family were partners with the Rosenthal family in highly successful butcher shops and restaurants. Okay. In 1928, the company that they owned rose to a high point of commercial success, and it was one of the most successful things in Cologne, and the Katz family got very, very, very wealthy. Okay. In February of 1928, they added, like I said, the restaurants. Okay. And one of the Katz family members who was married to the Rosenthal family, Rosa Katz Rosenthal, she was a key manager in one of the stores. Okay. Now, the Nazi Party had grown a bit, quite a bit, like I said, in 1928. By 1928, they had 100,000 members. And in April of 1928, two members of the Nazi Party, one of them was a amateur boxer, and his name was Jacob Damgorgen, and his friend was Karl Wauer. They went to the restaurant, one of the Katz restaurants, and they ordered goulash. Well, when they ordered the goulash, they claimed that there was a dead mouse in the middle of the goulash. That was completely false. But what they did is they created they committed a problem that they fought and argued with Rosa with, and they then, when she had them kicked out of the restaurant, but then a Nazi newspaper that was being published, Westdeutscher Beobachter, a West German newspaper, they started putting out articles about how bad the German Jews in Cologne were, and how the Katz family was faking everything, and had put the mouse in the food that their members were eating, and it went to this whole thing went to the court. And here is something. This is a cartoon or a caricature that was published by the Nazi newspaper, showing the Katz restaurant. You can see the Katz name way up here. Okay, the little bit of the Katz name there. Okay, well, the Katz family won in the court, and the Nazis were very, very frustrated about what was going on, that they lost in the court and so forth, and keep that in mind for what's coming down the line. Okay. The election in 1928 was a setback for the ultra-right parties, as they lost the seats, a bunch of seats that they had in the Reichstag. And this made their eventual success in the early 1930s much less predictable, because in 1928, it looked like the Nazi Party was just dying down. The Nazi Party was all over Germany by the late 1920s, even though they had lost a chunk in the 1928 election. They had their own propaganda newspapers, and they did marches in cities with flags and were openly anti-Semitic. And one of the things that my dad had told me years and years ago, I mean, I'm talking about even when I was a teenager and in college, especially in college when I was studying the history of Germany. That's one of the things I majored in history, and studying the history of Germany was one of the things I was focused on in college. And one of the things Dad told me was when he was 9, 10, 11 years old, he was born in 23. So when he was 9, 10, 11 years old, he and his and Uncle Richard and his mom, Martha, they would look out of the windows of their home and start to see many, many more flags, many more Nazi flags. So it was really, really upsetting when they would see these swastika flags all over the place. And so that's just typical of what started to happen in the 1930s, and of course was upsetting to German Jews. Well, in 1931, there was a great increase, like I said, in violence caused by the Nazi Party. And Dad and Mom and Uncle Richard saw some violence from their home going on. There were some stores that the Nazi Party went and attacked. And of course, some of them were arrested because that was still the Weimar Republic. And of course, there were a couple of incidents around Germany in which Nazis attacked some synagogues and just basically, broke some windows and what have you. In 1932, the Nazi Party membership was up to 1.5 million. Huge amount, huge amount. Hitler's approach to voters included constant insults of his opponents, outright anti-Semitism, and very big falsehoods that he knew he could get people to believe. He had outlined these approaches of putting out big falsehoods and insulting opponents and so forth. He put all of that in his book, Mein Kampf. Okay, and if you read Mein Kampf, you'll see that he did say that he was going to lie, and that lies were more usable with a lot of voters than the truth, and so on and so forth. It's amazing what he decided to do. In the election of July 31st of 1932, the number of Nazi Party seats in the Reichstag grew from 107 to 230. Now, the election of November 6th of 1932, they then lost 34 seats, so they dropped down. Despite the loss of their seats, there was a decision to actually work with them and be closer with them. And here's the example. You can see Hitler sitting there, and sitting right next to Hitler is the president of the Weimar Republic, Paul von Hindenburg. And the prior chancellor that he had appointed, Franz von Papen, the two of them decided to appoint Hitler as the chancellor, thinking that they could control him. He was appointed on January 30th of 1933 to be the Chancellor of Germany. Well, by 1933, like I said before, there were 600,000 German Jews. They were predominantly urban dwellers. The majority of Christians were more rural, okay? Some of the wealthy Jews did not think the Nazi Party programs would actually be part of the government. Many Jews thought that Hitler would just be a temporary chancellor. They thought that the anti-Semitism would really be against Eastern Jews, not German Jews. And interestingly, there were a number of German Jews who were not in favor of having Eastern Jews living in Germany. And in fact, by that time, there was a pretty big number of Eastern Jews from Poland, and other Eastern European countries that had fled to Germany during parts of the war, or even a little bit before the war, before World War I. And they did not like having Eastern Jews in their country. Now, that's not all German Jews, but there's a chunk of German Jews who had that kind of feeling against Eastern Jews. So some of the wealthy Jews did not think that the Nazi Party programs would last. On February 17th of 1933, however, Hitler ordered all local police headquarters to create working relationships with the Nazi parties. And he said that they had to work with and create relationships with the SA and the SS, the two soldier groups that were part of the Nazi Party. Many community police felt it was necessary to join the Nazi Party. It's not like they really wanted to be Nazis, a lot of these policemen, but they felt that since Hitler was in charge and things were happening in a certain way, that they had to connect to the Nazi Party. The Reichstag building was burned down on February 27th of 1933. The enabling act making Hitler the dictator was passed by the Reichstag on March 23rd of 1933, giving him what we would call emergency powers, but that was actually dictatorship powers. Attacks began on Jewish businesses and synagogues as Hitler established his dictatorial power. Unofficial boycotts were underway by mid-March of 1933. The first official action against the Jewish people was the boycott of Jewish businesses, doctors, and lawyers on April 1st of 1933. A Nazi Party executive put together a detailed plan for this first of official anti-Semitic action. So April 1st of 1933, the first official action against the Jewish people by the new government run by the Nazi Party by Hitler. So Richard Stern, Uncle Richard, he had, of course, feelings about, reactions to this. He was not only Jewish, but he was active in the Social Democratic Party. He used to take my dad, when Dad was a little kid, 8, 9, 10 years old, he used to take him to political gatherings of the SDP, the Social Democratic Party. Dad told me that as a little boy, he thought it was the most boring thing he ever had to do with his uncle. He was to go to these political party gatherings. Okay. The Jewish community in Cologne, as in all over Germany, knew that the boycott was coming, that I just mentioned before. Yet, they had no agreement about what the response to the Nazi Party's anti-Semitic action should be. The Cologne synagogue community issued a statement signed by their president and the rabbis about the Jewish community's dedication to Germany. What they wanted to do, what they felt was, if they showed that they were patriotic to Germany, maybe the Nazis would back off of them. Of course, completely wrong. They couldn't just show that they were patriotic. All right, on April 1st of 1933, uniformed members of the SA were placed next to the doorways of pretty much every Jewish merchant to prevent Germans from entering the store. Massive groups of the SA marched through the streets of Cologne, carrying signs demanding citizens to stay away from Jewish shops. They would grab some Jewish merchants and force them to hold the signs. Here's the example. Here is the SA soldiers of the Nazi Party forcing two owners, Jewish owners of a store in Cologne, to march through Cologne, carrying the signs of telling the Germans not to buy from Jewish businesses. And here's who these two people are. They're two members of the Katz family, cousins of Uncle Richard. Okay. Now, Uncle Richard had a complete different approach. Here's Uncle Richard. Here is Uncle Richard standing in the doorway of his store, protesting. And in fact, I found out that he was the only Jewish protester in Cologne, Germany, against the action of the Nazis on that day. Uncle Richard, he expressed to his friends and family before he stood up in the store, in the doorway of the store, he said, "I cannot be silent." He was not only standing up for the Jewish people, but he felt that he had to act according to civil rights allowed by the Weimar Republic. He had his brother-in-law print a pamphlet that outlined his family's participation in World War I, stated that he received the Iron Cross, and you can see he's wearing his Iron Cross, and you can see he's standing next to an SA soldier. And there are a number of people who have looked at this picture. I'm talking about German historians who say that Uncle Richard is basically making fun of the SA soldier, which is pretty much probably what he was doing. Now, how do I know that they were saying that? Because this picture is famous in Germany. It is in a number of museums all over Germany. So like you said, like I said, he wore his Iron Cross and he stood in the doorway, and he handed the leaflet that he had printed. He handed it out to everyone passing the store, including he handed the leaflet about World War I and the Jews. He even handed it to that SA soldier. After an hour, he was arrested and taken to the local police headquarters. A police officer who had already joined the Nazi Party, but he happened to know Uncle Richard. He knew Richard Stern, and he knew him because he had served as a veteran in the German army along with Richard Stern. And he saw him as kind of a friend. And what he did is when he saw him in the police station, he went over to him and he asked Richard, he said, "What are you doing here?" And Uncle Richard said, "I've been arrested by the Nazis." And so this police officer sneaked him out the back door, and Richard Stern made it back to his home, and he became he became very aware of what was starting to happen with the Nazis and what was going on. This is the pamphlet that he printed and handed out to people who were passing by the store. So, actions against the Jews in the 1930s, as the new leaders, of the Third Reich, they broadcasted their hatred of Jews, and they had a plan to get rid of them. In April and May of 1933, Jewish professors were dismissed from colleges. Jews were also removed from civil services. In September of 33, there was a law passed kicking Jews out of theater, music, and art institutions. And again, there were friends of my dad's family that were, also, hit by this. In April, the April 1933 law that was passed preventing Jewish students from going on to higher education. My dad actually was hoping to become an engineer, but he couldn't become an engineer because of that law that was passed. In July of 1933, the ability of naturalization of Eastern European Jews revoked. And in 1934, Nazi authorities decided to assuage Jewish business owners' fear because their services were vital to the German economy. They held back on pushing too much on business owners, Jewish business owners, because there were too many Germans that actually needed those businesses to be working. So they held off on them. And in our final episode class, I will talk about what happened in 38, leading up, of course, to Kristallnacht, the Crystal Night. So, and then, of course, in September of 1935, the Nazi Party convention in Nuremberg passed the Nuremberg laws, and they, of course, limited Jews from so many things, including taking away their citizenship, taking away their ability to marry. Oops, sorry, going back. Whoa. All right. What I'd like to do right now is open up for any questions that you have on anything that I've said so far. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I want to answer any questions. And in our final episode, on our final session in 2 weeks, I'll get into Kristallnacht, and I'll tell you at the end what Uncle Richard did and how he survived and what he did when he survived.
So you can unmute if you have a question. This just must be hard to go through. I mean, personally, it's it must be very emotional. I mean, you've gone through it a lot by now, but it's very personal.
Yeah, you're talking to me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting is that my Uncle Richard, who I knew as he looked at me as a grandson, and we did all kinds of fun things together, but he never, ever talked to me about his German life. He never talked to me about it. I didn't know about it until it was close to when he died. I actually saw the picture of him protesting in the doorway of his store when I was 12 going on 13, very close to my bar mitzvah, because we had moved into a new home, and the book that was written about the history of Jews in Cologne, Germany, that became that became one that I was able to look at, and I saw the picture in that book. So, any other questions?
Phyllis has a question.
Sure.
Phyllis, you need to unmute.
Yes, I didn't realize that when the German Jews were being accepted, that Jews from Eastern Europe, Poland, etc., Germans were prejudiced against them. I didn't realize there was like a two paths.
Yep. Well, and let me, I don't know how much you know. I'm sure that Rabbi Jessica knows about this.
I was a history major too.
Oh, well, the building of the Reform movement here in America was started by and run mostly by German Jews who moved to America in the 1800s, in the 19th century. And in New York, when there was a great immigration of Jews from Eastern Europe, a lot of the German Jews who were running Reform Judaism, they didn't want those Eastern European Jews to be part of their synagogues. And they actually, a bunch of those German Jews in the early 20th century helped to fund JTS, JTH, to set up places for the immigrants to go, because they didn't want them in the places that the German Jews went, which was basically Reform synagogues. And that was a common feeling among German Jews. And there were things written about the feeling of German Jews in Germany by a fellow who, by some fellows connected to Leo Beck Museum in Europe, in New York. I'm sorry, as well as in London.
Thank you. I took a lot of notes, just like I was in college.
Oh, that's great. If there's no more questions, and Rabbi, thank you so much. Thanks to Amanda, who's our producer this week. Appreciate it. I think we are off next week for Passover. So we have a break. Right. So there's no class on the 19th, and we'll come back to conclude with Rabbi Romberg on the 26th. So just a reminder, there is no class next week. It's great to see everyone. Thank you so much. And we'll see everybody next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Very